Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to our next viewer question and answer video. We have Vonnie, and Vonnie is a pastor out in New York. Finally, somebody from New York. I'm so shocked that it has taken this long to get a New Yorker to get on this video with me. So thank you for making time to do this.
Oh, it's good to be with you this morning, Kari.
Yeah. So what is your first question?
My first question, I'm going to pretty much read them.
Okay.
So, my first question is this, and I'm asking from more of a pastor's background, but I hope that these will also be helpful for families as well. Back in the day, floral arrangements were the tribute made to the deceased and to comfort the family. The visitation rooms were full of floral arrangements. Nowadays, there are fewer floral arrangements and more plants are given. More financial memorial gifts are given to churches and charities to honor the deceased. One trend I've seen develop in funeral homes who are working directly with, they're working directly with one florist, or some funeral homes now have their own floral shop. Mm-hmm. And what I see happening is, as soon as the arrangements are done, the book with the floral tributes comes out. And the family is asked, what would you like to purchase for flowers for your loved one, whether it's a casket spray or other flowers. I'm aware that as a pastor, I sometimes meet with the family and the funeral home personnel during the arrangements, mostly just to be a silent support. Yeah. But I am aware that some of my families that I've served in the past simply cannot afford the kinds of floral arrangements that the funeral home offers. As a matter of fact, I worked with one family who I did know their financial situation. I was close to the family. I was their pastor. And when this came back, they just had a look of shock on their face. And I could see that they were really starting to worry about how are we going to pay for those flowers. Mm-hmm. I did step in as their pastor. I don't think the funeral home personnel liked it, but I did step in and tell them they did not have to order from the funeral home. Do you see this as a trend where funeral homes are offering floral arrangements? And do you see it being done maybe as quickly as it was in this circumstance?
You know, it's not a new thing. Actually, some funeral homes are getting away from that, but it is another way for funeral homes to make some money because the florist will give them a lot of times a percentage of the sale. And so it's just another avenue for a sale within the funeral home. And some people have gotten away from it because being that middleman is really hard. And you can get a lot of criticism where they may pick something out from the book, but let's say they don't have yellow roses that day, so they substitute them with something else. But we're not told that. We've placed an order, it's done, and then the family shows up and it's not what they thought was coming. And so things like that I've worked at funeral homes that do both. And it's nice to offer a one-stop shop. There's many families who want to not have to run around town to do things if they do want flowers. So I think it's nice to say, give the option, not just put it in front of them and say, do you want stationery? Do you want these type of things? To give them that moment of getting to say no, where I know there are some places that say, okay, here is the stationery, please choose. Here are the flowers. It is a sales tactic where force them to tell you no, don't give them the option of telling you no. Because families, anybody in any sales situation is usually going to not jump in to tell you no if they're not asked the question. So unfortunately, it's a sales business at the end of the day because we have bills to pay as well to stay open. But I can see where it definitely creates uncomfortable situation for families. I know if there's, I know that if I'm working with families and I know there's a financial thing and we talk about flowers, I'll say, there's a lot of other things you can do. If mom was a quilter, you could bring a quilt, you can bring this, you can bring that. Flowers are just expensive no matter what. Whether they're ordered through the funeral home or through the florist, they're not that much different in pricing. I mean, if you have gone, I tried I had a viewer that had died in an accident, and I tried to just send like a little, like a vase with just 3 flowers in it, just a little something. I didn't know the person very well, but I knew what I meant to them in their journey towards the business. And their significant other had let me know they had died. And I was like, I would love to do something and just send a little flower. I could not do anything for under $50. And simple. I called every florist in the town, and they said, well, the flowers are going to be, $35, $40. And I was like, for 3 stems in a little vase to take them over to the funeral home that you're going to anyway, because you're going to be taking all the other flowers, but charging them on top of that, the delivery fee. And I thought, there's got to be a better way to do that part of it, which when I go, I'm going to hopefully interview some florists coming up as part of maybe a flower thing. But that really, it frustrated me that I couldn't do a little something. And to me, I'm like, $50 is a lot of money for anybody. So if, let's say, your friend dies across the country, or, an extended somebody or a coworker, and you just want to do a little something, you can't call a flower shop and have it delivered to the funeral home for an inexpensive price. That's what I saw. And I thought that was really frustrating. So I can only imagine people encountering that. But flowers they're just stupid expensive, especially if you die in the month of February. You're going to be out of luck for a few weeks, because flowers are just going to be expensive because of Valentine's Day.
Yes.
But I can understand your frustration. I don't think it's a trend. I think it's just how it is. And I think some parts of the country, just like, full couch or half couch caskets, it's a traditional thing. Like, if it's always been that way, a lot of places don't ever change. We've always sold the flowers through here, so we're going to do this always, always, always. And some places, they do believe they're doing a service to the family. It is a sales thing, though, as well. So it's kind of a, 6 one, half dozen of the other. But you will get families who I'm sure are offended, or listening in from your vantage point. It does sound a little, or maybe a lot, schmarmy, because it's adding to the sale of everything.
Yeah. I appreciate your mentioning that sometimes you share with families that there are other kinds of tributes that they can do, because I think some families just automatically think funeral, flower, and they just go together. So it's nice that you and your work also mentioned that there are other kinds of tributes that can be done. I really appreciate
people come up with some amazing, bringing in a horse saddle and putting that over the foot under the casket, or I've seen other funeral directors share so many cool things that they've done, helping families to maybe set up things. And there's some caskets that do have a flat bottom to them instead of a curve, which I love, because you can use it as almost a display table on the casket that you can set more up, like cowboy boots and all sorts of things. So I think you can get really creative. Again, if you don't know what you don't know, families don't know what they're allowed to do. They don't know how out of the box they can think. A lot of families have only been in one avenue and one highway lane, and they don't realize, well, you could come over here, you could go over here, and you can bring this in, or you can do this. And that's why it's up to the funeral director to really allow and let folks know what they're allowed to do. If nobody's ever died in their family, they've never done this, they have no idea. But it takes the funeral director doing it and wanting to give the time sometimes, or having the time and not being overwhelmed. And right now, unfortunately, we have a lot of very overwhelmed funeral directors because how things roll.
Very true. And I appreciate all the hard work that funeral directors have been doing during this time of COVID, because I have been overwhelmed.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure, have you been overwhelmed with doing funerals?
I have not, fortunately.
That's good.
I serve an elderly congregation, and thankfully they have all stayed healthy. And that's good.
That's good.
That's good.
Well, what's your number 2 question?
It's sort of in a similar vein. I have seen some funeral homes, especially when I was in the South, my ministry was mostly in North Carolina, who have either added onto their building or on a lot next to the funeral home that they own, build a facility that might have one large room or a large room. You know where I'm going with this.
Oh, yeah.
A large room or several small rooms. Some of them even have a kitchen. And you mentioned the one-stop shop. I'm glad you did, because this is another aspect of feeling like the funeral industry is moving in a one-stop shop kind of direction. As you know, they use these and suggest to families they might want to use their facility for refreshments or a meal before or after the service. Do you see this as a trend that's going to be taking place more and more in the future?
Yes, very much so. It has been a slow moving trend for the last probably 20 years with the whole celebration of life thing. I really don't love that term, but that whole concept that slowly has been building and rolling and everything, because you do, in communities, you have less gathering spaces that are neutral, that are not religious, or that are not veteran, even there's not a lot of veterans gathering spaces. The veterans groups are dwindling. And so you don't have the Elks Lodge, the Masons, the VFW, the American Legion, all these spaces that used to be used for luncheons are dwindling across the country. You then have people who don't have connection to a church, or we also encounter churches who are pretty stingy with their spaces, that, oh, they haven't tithed lately, or we don't really know them, or they're not a member, so they can't, all these things, or the church is very small and can't accommodate the size. So we run into all these things, and people needing a space, and there being no space for them. And that's where a lot of these spaces, these reception halls, these memorial chapels kind of came into play, is giving families that space to do something in, to gather, to have a memorial service, or just a celebration of life gathering that can accommodate them. And it's becoming more and more and more prevalent. And so you get these elderly groups that are now, I think, going to cemeteries a little less. And so the funeral director may go to the cemetery, but that group is still gathered and they want to continue being together, but they don't want to all get in their cars and go to a new area. So having a space to do just a cake and coffee little gathering so that folks can maybe be together for another hour and chat, is long, having a space even for 30 people or 40 people is really a key thing right now with families, because they really want that. Or even in between visitations, families are so spread out that maybe they can't get into a restaurant in that 2-hour time between, or they can't get to someone's home. And so having a little space that they could use or rent between, depending on how the funeral home is, that they can use to just pop to that other space, have lunch or dinner together, and then go back to visitation, can truly be a game changer for them as well. It can save them a lot of time from getting in cars and going, and they can relax without having to all figure out all the logistics. So I see that as well happening. But you also then encounter, if you're in the same building, you have a smell thing. So say you have, you've brought in this catered salmon meal. Well, then you're sitting in the funeral smelling salmon, which is not always appealing to people, or something with onions in it, and it just stinks up the place. Or, if you've gone into any place after someone brings home Subway or Jimmy John's or something, it has a very distinct smell to it. And I don't think it smells great. It's that lingering sandwich smell. And that's what a lot of people get. But it does permeate the building. So let's say you have maybe a visitation starting after this other family has had their thing. And so then you have a smell thing. I am very olfactory focused. I am very smell focused. And so to me, that is it's very pungent, and it can be a big put off when you walk in and spaces smell like certain things. So that's also another consideration. I know some places don't allow food because of that factor. So you get both sides of the coin. And then also serving food to the public. And then you have to worry about, kind of the licensing with that. And what if somebody gets sick, and are you going to allow them to bring in beer and wine, and lots of factors, but it is definitely a thing that is happening, becoming more and more prevalent. People are having to reimagine their facilities and their spaces to go with the changing business. And this business changes very slowly, but it does change drastically over that course of time. And so you have to either keep up or you're going to be out, unfortunately.
I can see that. I can appreciate what you've said. In my experience, there are a lot less families and people who are related to some church or civic club where they can use their facility. And I imagine that does help many families.
Well, and these startup churches are a thing right now, where you have these small churches that rent small spaces in strip malls, or they use the auditorium at a gym or something like that. They don't have a luncheon space. Yes. So they maybe have a space to have a service if the space is available that day, but then they may not have a space to have a gathering and have a luncheon and stuff. So even if you're connected to a church, you may not always have those next steps available for your parishioners. And it's good to have these other options and to help people. People want answers presented to them, optional answers, not, okay, where are you going to have it? Mm-hmm. And them go, I have no idea. But if you say, hey, these are great options. I've come to know you while we've been talking. I understand your connections in the community, and, your dad did this, or your dad did this, or your church. Here's some great options for you. Would you like me to help you call? Do we need a caterer? Do we need this? And you can help them more than, it helps your business more than will ever hurt it, even if they don't use your space, because you're helping provide answers to people. And I think that goes far beyond a $100 sale of anything.
Yeah.
Everybody may not agree with that, but that's my opinion on it.
Well, even as a pastor, it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Where this could meet a need of a family where the church or a civic club might not be able to meet that need.
Correct. Yeah. What's your number 3?
My question number 3 is, in what ways can a family's pastor work cooperatively with you in helping to plan the arrangements, the funeral, the burial? And what way can pastors work cooperatively with you that helps to meet the needs of the family?
I think this is a great question, because a lot of funeral directors feel very strongly about pastor interaction, because it can go very poorly sometimes. And it's only at the detriment of the family when that happens, I feel like. Sometimes, because it is a funeral, pastors will try to take over the whole scenario, when truly the funeral director has to make sure from the beginning to that end, the whole arc is covered. And pastors are one of the components of. It's not that we need to be in charge, but we need everybody cooperating. And we do get pastors that come in and want to just take over, and they will verbally downplay the funeral director in front of the funeral director. And they will tell the families they don't need the funeral home for things. And that is where this huge divide gets put in there. And I don't want to work with you if you're going to downgrade me and call me and talk bad about the profession when you don't even know what we can do. And guess what? You do need me for things. So that is one part. When pastors sometimes will jump in and they will schedule with a family before they've even gone to the funeral home, not knowing if it even works with the funeral home. That's one of the biggest kind of frictional moments, because then sometimes we feel like we can't tell the family no, because they've already posted the times on Facebook, because we set it up with the church, it's all set and we're good to go. When the funeral home might already have 3 funerals that day and has no funeral directors, but some funeral homes will just say, okay, we'll just make this work. We'll, do whatever. And they make it work. But that is one thing that is really hard, is making sure the family's gotten some stuff set with the funeral home not scheduling anything. I mean, we need the pastors on board. We need everybody. That schedule, we have to make sure it lines up for everybody, cemetery included, vault company, everybody. So it's not just one person. And unfortunately, sometimes that one person wants to try and take over, and that doesn't work. So knowing that it's a team that has to work together, and it has to be sort of led by the funeral director. When we're in the church and we're at the church for the service, I always say, we're in your house. Please tell me how you would like things to go in here. Do you want the casket open, close? Where do you want us to set up? I'm going to make sure we're doing things in their way. But if it's in the funeral home, we have a way that we need things to run, and we'd love the pastor's input, but without it being talked at.
Yes.
And that happens too. So I think it's just understanding how that relationship can and needs to work is sometimes difficult. We have some pastors, I'm just thinking of some specific pastors, and they don't like funeral homes. And it's very clear, and they're not kind to us when we come to their facility, and they don't want us to come inside. They'll be like, we'll handle it. Well, I'm in charge of that body, and I'm going where that body goes. And, but let's say, like with the Muslim faith, they are doing prayers, especially for a man, that they don't want non-Muslim people in there, and they don't want especially a woman in there. I respect that. They have not been rude to me personally about that scenario, and so I am happy to respect that. But if you're rude to me, then I'm not going to be, I can't be warm and fuzzy with you if you're rude to me. That's what I'm going to still do my job, but I'm not going to be as warm and fuzzy. Oh, yeah. I think funeral directors also need to understand and learn the faith that they're working with and how that church works, and not just say, well, I'm doing what I want to do. It's blah, blah, blah. And unfortunately, we have a lot of that personality in the business that they may come in a little combative against the pastor. So it is definitely understanding how the team works together from both sides, and making sure it goes smoothly for the family.
Well, I think for me, one of the first things I do when I go to a new church is I meet all the funeral directors in the area and have a chance to, over lunch or just coffee or whatever, sit down and say, I want to get acquainted with you because we're in the same business in many ways. And that's during a time of grief and mourning. We're here to comfort and provide help to the family, maybe from a different perspective, but we're doing the same thing.
Right.
I found that to be very helpful. And with some pastors or with some funeral directors, if they haven't had a funeral in the church in quite a long time and the pastors have changed, to sit down and just say, here's kind of the ground rules that might be helpful for you to know, so that when you come, we don't get into this kind of tension.
Right.
That's not the time or place to have that.
Well, it turns into a pissing match.
Yeah, I appreciate the way you work with people in that way.
I will say one other thing that when it comes to pastors that I've talked about before is the honorariums. And this is something where pastors don't want to be forthcoming with families and say, okay, this is what I want you to pay me for this service. This is what our members, that participate, the organist, the janitor, they need to be paid for services. It is wonderful when pricing is all laid out and we know exactly what we need to pass on to families, or the church gives those items to families. Because what happens too many times is we tell a family, there's going to be honorariums that you're going to need to do for the church. Well, mom's been a member her whole life. There's going to be no honorariums. They argue with us. So we say, all right, you can talk to the church about it. The church never conveys it to the family. And then we get a call a week later saying, why haven't I gotten my check? Well, did you tell the family they owed you money? No. How do you expect to be paid if you don't convey your fees? So they expect us to do it because it makes them uncomfortable. And that's the term a lot of them have used, is they don't want to tell a family they need to be paid. And pastors need to be paid. There is a lot of time and energy that goes into doing a funeral. I have preached, I don't know what else to call it. I've led many services that I've done the whole service, it's a lot of energy and time and getting to know the person and getting to know the family and getting songs or readings or whatever. It takes time, and that time is valuable. And then you're also there for 3 to 4 hours, if not more, the day of the service. So you have sometimes up to 8+ hours invested in one funeral that you deserve to be compensated for, whether it's 100 to 300, whatever that, that's usually the range. Is I always do about 250 is kind of my middle ground, but that I convey, but depends on area of the country and whatnot. But conveying that and letting families know from the church is every funeral director's dream, because us being the middleman is, we actually take on that debt if the family doesn't pay it up front, and we're writing those checks out before we receive payment to the church, where they could just write them right to the church if the church conveyed it. So that's definitely a big gray area that could be a little more cleared up as well. But just like weddings, I remember going to churches, looking at churches for weddings, and they would, here's our price list right up front, but nobody, there's very few churches that have that for a funeral. And it would be nice if they had the same, okay, if you're a member, it's this. If it's a non-member, it's this. Here you go. On we go. That would be lovely. So, yeah. Well, those were excellent questions. They were really good.
Thank you. Good. It's been nice chatting with you.
You too. Yeah. I see your little Pooh Bear quote behind you.
I have 2 of them on the wall, actually. One of my favorite characters.
Yeah. My kids never got into Winnie the Pooh. Like, they just never connected with his cartoons very much. But there's so many good little life lesson moments in what he does in such a quiet, ho-hummy way. It's so cool.
That's great. I do want to say that I greatly appreciate who you are and the way in which you're very forthcoming. I've learned a lot through all of your videos. That's helping me as an individual and as a pastor. It's really enlightened me in many ways, and I do really appreciate all that you do.
Thank you so much. That really keeps me doing what I do. That's honestly knowing that somebody's getting something out of it. It's really great. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us again, and check us out next week on Sunday. I almost said next Wednesday, and that's not going to work. Next Sunday to see what state we will be in next. We're winding down, getting to the end. We'll see what state ends up being our last one, because we're close. I think we're like 10 from the end or something, which is crazy. So we'll see you guys later. Bye.